The sun had barely crested over the suburban rooftops when I pulled my '67 Impala into my daughter's driveway. The tires crunched over the gravel edge where the concrete had started to crack. A line of dandelions sprouting like rebellious little survivors between the seams. My girl never did care much about the small things. Details got lost in all the busy. She was always busy. Even now, Clara probably had her laptop open, her Bluetooth headset chirping, one hand stirring overpriced almond milk into her coffee while she yelled at a muted Zoom meeting. Life moved fast for her. For people like me, life was something you marinated in. The engine let out its familiar low growl as I shifted into park. That sound was music to me. Raw, mechanical poetry. She didn't purr like those new electric toys zipping around the freeway. No, the Impala had soul. She rumbled. She breathed. She told you she was alive. I ran my hand over the steering wheel, worn smooth from decades of turns and long drives, before stepping out onto the driveway, my knee cracking with a pop like dry branches underfoot. I was barely standing upright when I heard the voice. Oh my God, he actually drove that thing. It was Jeremy, my grandson. 15, going on 35, with the kind of smugness only the digital generation could muster. He stood on the porch in a branded hoodie that probably cost more than a month of my groceries, scrolling on his phone like the world existed in a 4-inch screen. His friend beside him let out a bark of laughter. Dude, Jeremy continued without even lowering his voice, that car belongs in a museum. Or, like, a scrapyard. I can't believe it still runs. I stood there, one hand on the roof of my car, pretending to brush off some imaginary dust. It was easier than letting the words settle, easier than letting them hurt. The friend leaned against the railing, whispering something that made Jeremy laugh harder. Bet it's got one of those roll-up windows, he said. So vintage, so tragic. The disrespect didn't sting because it was loud. It stung because it was casual. Like I was an afterthought. Like I wasn't 3 feet from them. Like I hadn't helped raise that boy while his mother clawed her way up corporate ladders. I kept my eyes on the Impala and gave her roof one final pat. You've survived worse, I whispered, more to myself than her. You're still here. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of cinnamon candles and something artificial trying to imitate vanilla. Clara offered me a quick, distracted kiss on the cheek, not quite making eye contact. Glad you made it, Dad. Jeremy's got soccer at 3, so we're a bit tight on time. I nodded, setting the apple pie I'd baked onto the counter. Still warm, still made from scratch. She didn't comment on it, just waved a hand vaguely toward the living room, her eyes already back on her phone. Jeremy breezed in a moment later, still tapping away at his screen. I stood from the couch. Morning, Jeremy. He didn't look up. Yo, he mumbled, already halfway to the hallway. I watched him disappear down the corridor without even glancing at the pie, the couch, me. It was like I was air, like I'd slipped into the walls without realizing it. My presence mattered no more than the grandfather clock in the corner. Just old furniture, still ticking. At lunch, Clara praised Jeremy's latest school achievements, how he was getting serious about business school, and definitely going Ivy League if he keeps it up. Jeremy didn't react much, just scrolled, occasionally grunted. Every once in a while, he'd show his mother a meme or a viral clip, the two of them sharing a brief laugh that never reached their eyes. It was like I wasn't at the table. When I brought up how my old shop had finally closed, the one I ran for nearly 40 years, neither of them reacted. Not even a sorry to hear that. I wasn't fishing for sympathy. I was just trying to talk, trying to remind them I still had a story. "You should just sell that car already," Jeremy said suddenly, between bites of overpriced takeout. "Seriously, Grandpa, what's the point of driving a death trap like that? It's embarrassing. You're not, like, clinging to the past or something, are you?" I felt Clara shift awkwardly beside him, not to scold him, just because she didn't want to deal with the fallout. "I like that car," I said gently. "It's been with me a long time." Jeremy snorted. "Yeah, like a fossil. Honestly, I bet if you sold it, you could afford a Tesla. Something that doesn't need a leash to keep its bumper on." His friend, now seated across the kitchen island, laughed again. I stared at my plate, the roast chicken suddenly cold in my mouth, and in that silence, I felt something inside me bend, not break, but bend, like a tree in high wind. I wasn't mad. Not yet. But I was tired. Later, after the laughter had faded, and the dishes were being half-heartedly rinsed, I walked out to the driveway and stood beside the Impala. The sun had shifted. Her shadow stretched long across the pavement, touching the tire of Jeremy's electric scooter, parked neatly nearby. Silent, spotless, a symbol of everything he'd been handed, not earned. I opened the driver's side door and eased in, letting the seat hug me like it always did. That car had taken me to my wedding, to the hospital where my daughter was born, to the cemetery where I buried Maria. That car knew my whole life. It had heard me cry. It had heard me sing. It had waited patiently through every chapter I lived. And now my grandson looked at me, and saw nothing but rust. I turned the key. She started on the second try, like always. Reliable. Loud enough to stir the neighbors. As I pulled away, I saw Jeremy laughing with his friend in the rearview mirror. He didn't even glance at the car, but I glanced back at him. And for the first time in a very long time, I began to wonder what legacy I was really leaving behind, and who deserved it. I drove for nearly an hour after leaving Clara's house, not toward anywhere in particular, just away. Away from the smug laughter, away from the shrugging disinterest, away from the realization that the people who shared my blood could still make me feel like a ghost. It wasn't the first time I'd felt small under the weight of family silence, but it was the first time I felt truly obsolete. The Impala's engine hummed beneath me, steady and warm like a heartbeat. She always knew how to carry me when I needed it. No GPS, no backup camera, no touchscreen dashboard, just a man, a wheel, and the road. That car was more than transportation. She was a partner in my life. And like any partner worth her salt, she'd never once betrayed me. I pulled into a parking lot behind the old church just past Ashwood Lane. It was quiet there, mostly empty. I slid the gear into park, turned off the ignition, and just sat. The only sounds were the ticking of the engine cooling down and the occasional chirp of a bird overhead. This had always been my thinking spot. Years ago, I'd bring Maria here, on Sunday evenings after Mass. We'd sit on the bench under the old sycamore and split a thermos of coffee, watching the light fade behind the steeple. I leaned back in the seat, ran my hands across the leather wheel. The surface was cracked in places, like my own hands, aged, weathered, but still strong. Every inch of this car had a story. The summer I turned 25, I found her in a junkyard on the outskirts of town. A forgotten shell, roof caved in, paint long gone, engine shot. But I saw something in her. I saw bones. I saw the promise of motion, of rebuilding. I paid $200 and towed her home myself, scraping together every free hour I had between shifts at the body shop. It took me a full year. Nights spent under harsh fluorescence in my small garage. Calloused palms, bruised knuckles, the constant sting of motor oil in my skin. Maria would bring me lemonade, or coffee depending on the weather, and she'd sit on a folding chair, reading aloud while I worked under the hood. It wasn't just about fixing a car, it was building a future. That Impala became the first thing I truly made for myself. She was our wedding car. I remember how Maria stepped into her in that long white dress, lifting the hem so it wouldn't catch on the seat. I drove her to the reception with tin cans clanking behind us and shaving cream spelling "just married" on the back windshield. We drove through the city with horns honking and strangers cheering, and for a few shining hours, that car felt like a royal carriage. Later, when Clara was born, we brought her home from the hospital in that same car. I had vacuumed the interior and wiped every surface like we were bringing a queen home. She slept in her carrier, oblivious, while Maria hummed softly beside me. We were poor, sure, but we had pride. That car held us like a cradle, safe and solid and strong. Through every chapter, road trips to nowhere, late-night grocery runs, Sunday drives just for the joy of motion, that car was there. She didn't complain when Maria's illness started. She just kept going. She was there through the chemo appointments, through the nights when the hospital said we should prepare ourselves. And after Maria was gone, I spent hours sitting in the driveway with the radio on, replaying memories through every station. The Impala became my companion in grief, in resilience, in remembrance. She kept me grounded when the world felt too quiet. And now Jeremy had reduced her to a joke, a bucket of bolts, an embarrassment. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers on the gear shift. Kids like him didn't understand the value of anything without a charging port or a social media handle. To him, life was measured in upgrades. Newer, faster, flashier. But I had built my life on durability, on care, on things that could be fixed, not thrown away. It wasn't just about the car, it was what she represented. She was a monument to everything I believed in. That hard work mattered. That history was worth honoring. That love, even after death, leaves fingerprints on every surface. A few weeks ago, one of the side mirrors had cracked. Just a chip from a stone on the freeway. And I'd driven an hour out of town to a specialty junk dealer to find the exact model piece. I could have slapped on a generic one from Amazon in minutes, but that would have been an insult to her. And to me, people don't treat things with reverence anymore. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Jeremy didn't just insult my car. He insulted the idea that some things are worth keeping, worth fixing, worth loving long after they lose their shine. The wind picked up slightly, and I rolled down the window. The air was crisp, smelled faintly of dry leaves and gasoline. A familiar scent, the kind that reminded me I was still here, still real, still someone with value, even if my family had forgotten how to see it. I remembered, too, the way Clara used to beg me for rides in the Impala when she was a little girl. How she'd wave at passing cars like a princess and ask me to go, "Faster, Papa, faster." And I always did, just a little. Enough to make her giggle and grip the seatbelt like it was an adventure. That sound, her laughter echoing through the cabin, was still trapped somewhere in those seats. I could hear it if I closed my eyes. It wasn't nostalgia. It was history. And history has weight. Jeremy thought I was stuck in the past, but the truth was, the past had built me. Brick by brick, scar by scar. Eventually, I started the engine again. The rumble filled my chest like a second heartbeat. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next, but I knew one thing for certain. That car wouldn't go to someone who mocked it, who mocked me, If I had any legacy left, it wouldn't land in the hands of a boy who couldn't see past a paint chip. I put her in drive and pulled back onto the road, heading home, not just with the intention to rest, but with a decision quietly forming. If Jeremy saw my car as worthless, maybe it was time to show him just how valuable it truly was. A week passed before I saw Clara and Jeremy again. I hadn't planned on returning so soon, but Clara called and asked if I could help fix a leak under her kitchen sink. She sounded frazzled, impatient, like she was multitasking even through the phone. I said yes, of course. I always did. Not because I liked plumbing. Lord knows I'd rather change a transmission than crawl under a sink. But because saying yes made me feel useful, needed. And these days, those moments were rare. I pulled up the driveway in the Impala again, this time parking a little straighter than usual, as if maybe that would stop the mocking. It didn't. The second the engine cut off, I heard the click of the blinds in the front window, a flicker of movement, a pause. Then Jeremy's voice, muffled but distinct. Is he seriously still driving that thing? This time I didn't even flinch. I just sighed and grabbed my toolbox from the trunk. Inside, Clara met me with a distracted hug and a headset still dangling from one ear. Thanks, Dad. I'm in back-to-back meetings all day. Jeremy can help you if you need anything. Jeremy, help me. That was rich. He appeared a moment later, slouched in a chair, thumbs dancing across a game controller. When Clara walked out of the room, I cleared my throat. Hey, Jeremy, can you bring me a flashlight from the garage? He didn't look up. Why? Because I'm fixing your mother's sink. He shrugged. Sounds like a you problem. I stared at him. No emotion, no apology. Just that hollow, smug look that kids wear when they think they've already outgrown the people who raised them. I was reminded of something my own father used to say. The hardest thing in the world is to raise someone who forgets how they were lifted. I fixed the sink without him, of course. Took me longer than I'd like to admit. My knees didn't bend like they used to, and I had to get up 3 times to get the right fitting. But I got it done. When I stood up and stretched my back, I found Jeremy in the doorway with a soda in hand, watching me like I was a relic in a museum. Didn't know dinosaurs knew plumbing, he muttered. I wiped my hands on a rag. Some of us learned the hard way, trial and error, long days, real tools. He smirked. You could just Google it, you know. I could, I said, but then I'd forget it as fast as I learned it. He didn't answer, just wandered off like he'd already won something. That night, over reheated leftovers and awkward small talk, I tried to reach him. Really reach him. I told him about the shop I used to own, Frank's Garage, and how, when Clara was his age, I'd have her come sweep the floors on weekends. I talked about rebuilding the Impala, about how I taught myself through manuals and busted knuckles. Jeremy nodded absently, but kept glancing at his phone. When I finished, he looked up. So, like, you were poor? The question hit harder than he intended, not because of the words, but the way he said them. Flat. Dismissive. Like poverty was a character flaw instead of a crucible. We weren't rich, I said, but we had enough. And what we didn't have, we made work. He smirked. No offense, but why didn't you, like, invest in tech or crypto or something? You could have made bank. I laughed softly, but not because it was funny. Different times, kid. We didn't grow up thinking about exit strategies and influencer deals. We worked, we saved, we lived small and dreamed big. He shrugged. Sounds kind of sad. No, I said, meeting his eyes for once. What's sad is thinking everything has to be new to be valuable. What's sad is thinking money makes you wise. Jeremy rolled his eyes. Okay, boomer. And there it was, the line, the wall, that invisible divide between generations that sometimes cracks into a canyon, too wide to shout across. I realized, sitting there under those soft kitchen lights, that Jeremy didn't just not understand me. He didn't want to. To him, I was background noise. Faded photographs. The old guy who showed up with pies and stories that didn't matter. And Clara, she wasn't much better. She praised my resilience when it was convenient, but never listened to the lessons beneath my words. She joined us at the table a bit later, and the two of them chatted about summer internships and what kind of car Jeremy would want once the money situation got sorted. I knew what that meant. They assumed I'd leave something behind. A nest egg. An inheritance. Probably thought I had a few thousand tucked away at most. They didn't know I had nearly 7 figures in savings. That the garage sale of my business, plus a lifetime of modest living, had added up to more than anyone expected. I never flaunted it. Never needed to. But the idea that they only saw me as an aging bank account started to burrow under my skin. Later, when I left, I stood in the driveway for a moment before opening the car door. Jeremy and his friends were sitting on the steps again, laughing about something on their phones. One of them gestured toward the Impala. Still runs on coal, right? Jeremy joked. Bet it leaks oil like Grandpa leaks memory. His friends cackled. I said nothing. Just started the engine and backed out slow, letting the tailpipes growl louder than usual. Let them hear the rumble. Let it echo. Because what they didn't understand, what they couldn't yet grasp, was that one day that sound would haunt them, not with anger, but with regret. The next morning, I found myself headed toward the east end of town, toward the edge where the old auto district used to hum with life. Most of the shops I remembered were long gone, replaced by condos, vape lounges, or blank commercial lots plastered with for-lease signs. But tucked between a run-down pawn shop and a shuttered diner stood a small building that hadn't changed much in 20 years. Julio's Garage. The sign was handmade, faded red paint, white letters peeling at the corners. The glass in the office window was still covered with car-themed decals, old racing flags, spark plug logos, and one cracked sticker that read, "Real men fix what they love." I smiled when I saw it. I had given Julio that sticker the day he signed his first lease. I parked the Impala out front, and before I even got the door open, Julio stepped out, wiping his hands on a shop towel. He was older now, thicker in the shoulders, a little more gray along the temples, but the same kid I took under my wing back when he was just 17 and wild-eyed with ambition. He paused, then grinned. "Frank," he shouted, arms wide like he'd seen a ghost he actually liked. "I thought you'd finally traded that beast in for a coffin." I laughed and stepped out of the car. "Nah, she's still purring." He came over and gave me a solid hug. Not the half-hearted kind you give out of obligation, but a real one. A man's hug. The kind that said, "You still matter here." "God, it's good to see you," he said, stepping back. "She's looking good. I still remember you pulling this thing in on a flatbed when I was sweeping floors in your shop." "You remember that?" I asked. "Hell yeah. You made me stay late to help you realign the hood, remember? You didn't even pay me, said it was a lesson in patience." We both laughed, and just like that, the years melted. It felt good. Grounding. Like finding a pocket of the world that still spoke your language. Julio walked me inside. The garage smelled of oil, rubber, and metal, a scent that felt like home. There were 3 bays now, 2 of them full with cars in various states of disrepair. A young woman worked under the hood of a Toyota, earbuds in, ponytail swinging as she worked. Julio waved to her proudly. "That's Carmen. Smart as hell. Hired her last year. Reminds me of me at that age. Well, smarter." I nodded. "You're building something good here." He looked around and smiled. "I had a good teacher." I looked at him closely. Julio didn't just keep the garage alive. He'd made it better, cleaner, more efficient. The tools were organized, the floor swept, the place buzzing but not chaotic. It had heart, and it was clear from the way the younger mechanics greeted him that he was respected, not feared. There's a difference. Julio knew it. "So what brings you around?" he asked, handing me a mug of coffee from a greasy counterpot. "Not that I'm complaining." I sipped and leaned against the workbench. Needed to see something that still made sense. He raised an eyebrow. "Family?" I nodded. "They treat me like I'm just waiting to disappear. My grandson called my car a fossil, said it belonged in a scrapyard." Julio winced. "Oof, rough." "Yeah, makes you wonder what they really think of you when you're not holding a checkbook." Julio was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what I think, Frank? People who build things, really build them, we see value where others see rust. We see the story. They see the surface. You taught me that." I let his words settle. It wasn't just flattery. He meant it. We talked for another hour. He asked about Clara, about the old shop, about Maria. I told him what I could. When I mentioned Maria's favorite spot on the passenger side, the place where she used to rest her hand while we drove, Julio smiled softly. "She used to bring cookies, remember?" he said. "Real ones. Still warm in a napkin." "Chocolate chip," I added. "Always 2 for me, 2 for her, and 1 extra for whoever was sweeping the bay." We both laughed. Then we went out to the Impala. He circled her slowly, hand running along the curve of the trunk. "Still solid," he said. "You kept her in better shape than most people keep themselves." "She's aging, like me," I replied. "But she's still standing." He looked at me seriously then. "She's more than a car, Frank. She's your story, and she deserves to be in the hands of someone who sees that." I didn't say anything at first, just looked at him. This man I once took in when no one else would. He'd had a rough start, deadbeat father, bounced between jobs, almost got locked up for stealing parts before I offered him a place to learn, to grow. He'd earned every inch of that garage. "You know," I said slowly, "my grandson thinks I'm worth less than the bumper on this car." Julio's jaw clenched. "Then he doesn't know what worth is." And that was when the thought began to crystallize. A seed planted the week before was now taking root. What if the future didn't belong to blood? What if it belonged to legacy, to values? Maybe it was time to stop trying to convince people of my worth. Maybe it was time to give that worth to someone who already knew it. It was a Tuesday, and the rain had come down in steady gray sheets since morning. Not the kind of dramatic thunderstorm that shakes the windows, but the slow, unrelenting kind that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel heavier than it should. I'd been planning to stay home that day. I had a book I'd been meaning to finish, and the weather gave me the perfect excuse not to go anywhere. But then Clara called. "Dad." she said, breathless. Can you swing by later? Jeremy borrowed a bin of your old tools for his robotics class project, and he left it in the garage. He needs it for school tomorrow. I hesitated. I didn't want to go, not after the last time. Not after hearing him laugh with his friends about my car, about me. But I didn't argue. I rarely did when Clara asked me for something. Old habits die hard. Sure, I said. I pulled up their driveway around 4 p.m. The rain hadn't let up. My wipers made long, moaning arcs across the windshield, pushing aside the drizzle just long enough to show me the house. Pristine, modern, with that polished sort of perfection that always felt cold to me. I shut off the engine and grabbed my coat, stepped out with a grunt as my knees complained beneath me, and walked toward the garage. That's when I heard it, laughter. Not the pleasant kind. Not the warm, shared family sort of sound. No, this was teenage laughter. Cruel, sharp. The kind that stabs first and thinks later. The garage door was partially open, and I ducked under it to find Jeremy and two of his friends huddled around something. Spray cans in their hands. Bright neon caps scattered across the floor. At first I thought they were working on a school project, maybe painting something for class, but then I saw it. My license plate. My actual license plate, the original, slightly bent metal one that had been on the back of the Impala for decades. The same one Maria and I had driven across 8 states with when we were newlyweds. The same one I'd polished every few months like it was a badge of honor. And now, it lay on the concrete floor like a discarded toy, painted over in cheap neon pink, with the word relic scrawled in cartoonish bubble letters across it. They were laughing at it like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Jeremy looked up and froze when he saw me standing there. His friends quieted too, one of them awkwardly hiding a spray can behind his leg. "Grandpa," Jeremy said, trying to smile, "we were just messing around. Chill, okay? It's not like we damaged anything important." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the plate, at the insult, at the wet ring of paint beginning to pool around the corners of it. I looked at Jeremy. I looked at his friends. My throat felt dry. "Where did you get that plate?" I asked, my voice low but steady. Jeremy shrugged. "From your car. I unscrewed it earlier. Thought it'd be funny to give it a makeover." "A makeover?" I repeated. "Yeah. It's a joke, Grandpa. No big deal. It's just a stupid piece of metal." He was smiling, smirking even, like he expected me to laugh too, to roll my eyes and let it slide like I always had, like I was the silly old man who didn't get it and never pushed back hard enough to change the story. But something shifted in me then. Something deep. It wasn't just about the license plate. It was about the decades that came before it. It was about being told I was too old to matter. About being mocked for what I built, ignored for what I carried, erased in the very house I once helped pay for. "That piece of metal," I said slowly, "was on the back of my car the day your mother was born. It drove her home from the hospital. It was with me and your grandmother when we had our first big fight and our first big reconciliation. That plate has seen more life than you've even imagined." Jeremy laughed, as if I were proving his point. "So what? It's like sentimental or something? You're getting worked up over a license plate?" "No," I said, finally lifting my gaze to meet his eyes. "I'm getting worked up because you stole from me. You vandalized something that didn't belong to you, and you laughed while you did it. It's not that serious, Grandpa." "It is to me," I said. "It should be to anyone who values history, respect, family." I turned to Clara, who had just stepped out the side door with her phone in hand. Her smile faltered when she saw the scene. "What's going on?" she asked, looking from me to Jeremy to the paint-stained plate. "Ask your son," I said. She took a step forward and saw the word relic staring up at her. She went quiet. "Jeremy," she said, voice tight, "did you take that from Grandpa's car?" Jeremy rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, I already explained." "Answer the question," she snapped. Jeremy looked surprised, then irritated. "Yes, okay?" I took it. "Big deal. I was just playing." And there it was again. That dismissive tone, that shrug of indifference, that lack of consequence that had followed him around like a shadow his whole life. And suddenly I realized something painful. Clara had let him become this. Not because she didn't love him, I knew she did, but because she didn't have time to teach him differently. She looked at me, guilt flickering behind her eyes. But it was too late. I bent down, picked up the plate, and stared at the damage. The paint was still wet. My fingers smeared through the bright pink letters as I turned it in my hands. "You think I'm a relic," I said quietly. "Maybe I am. But relics survive. They outlast. They hold meaning. You, on the other hand, have no idea what it means to value anything unless it comes in a box or earns you likes." Jeremy scoffed. "Whatever. You're being dramatic." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm done being quiet." I turned and walked to my car, setting the plate gently on the front seat, paint and all. I paused, feeling the weight of the moment press against me like thunder. Then I faced them both again. "You two might think you've got my legacy all figured out," I said. "Maybe you think I'm just some harmless old man with stories no one listens to. But I promise you this. You're going to remember this moment, one day when it matters." With that, I got into the Impala, started her up, and backed down the driveway without another word. The rain hit harder now, pelting the windshield in angry sheets. But I felt clearer than I had in years. That night, I didn't just sleep, I rested. And the next morning, I called my attorney and scheduled a meeting. Because my grandson needed to learn something he couldn't Google. Respect is earned, inheritance is not. The lawyer's office hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. Same leather chairs that creaked when you sat. Same dusty fern in the corner. Same smell of printer paper and stale coffee. It was a modest space, tucked between a dental clinic and a UPS store, but it was quiet, private. The kind of place where decisions were made in calm tones and thick envelopes. The receptionist gave me a polite nod as I entered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harding. Mr. Stein will be right with you." I sat down and waited, gripping the manila folder I'd brought with me. Documents, titles, a list of assets I'd kept for decades in a fireproof box beneath my bed. Most of it had been in order since Maria passed, but some lines had grown stale, and others, well, they needed rewriting. "Frank," came the familiar voice. I looked up and saw Gary Stein, same horn-rimmed glasses, same tired eyes that had seen 1,000 family disputes play out on paper. He extended his hand. "Good to see you again. Hope this isn't a somber occasion." "Just a necessary one," I said, rising. We walked into his office, and I took the same seat I always did, near the window. Outside, the sky had cleared since yesterday's rain, but the streets were still wet, shining like polished stone. Gary sat behind his desk and flipped open a legal pad. "So, what can I help you with today?" "You mentioned revising your will?" I nodded and slid the folder toward him. "I want to make some changes. Big ones." He opened the folder and scanned the documents. "Okay, so. Currently, Your estate leaves everything to your daughter, Clara, and your grandson, Jeremy, as secondary beneficiary, correct? Right, I said. That's what we put in after Maria passed. Gary adjusted his glasses. And you're looking to change that? I nodded. I want to remove them. Entirely. His pen stopped mid-scratch. Remove them? Yes. Clara gets nothing. Jeremy gets less than nothing. I want the entirety of my assets. My house, my savings account, the life insurance policy, the garage lease in Riverside, and the Impala. All of it. To go to someone else. He blinked. Do you mind if I ask why? I looked down for a moment, organizing my thoughts. You ever try to hand someone a piece of your soul and watch them spit on it? He didn't answer, but I could tell he understood. I raised Clara with values, I said. She watched her mother and I scrape together everything we had so she could go to school, live better. I never asked for anything in return, just respect. But I watched her raise a boy who couldn't even grasp the concept of gratitude, who mocks what he doesn't understand, who thinks I'm just an inconvenience waiting to go quietly into the dirt. I shook my head. I'm not angry, not anymore. I'm just finished. Gary nodded slowly. Who would you like to leave your estate to then? I smiled. Julio Martinez. His eyebrows lifted. The mechanic? Not just a mechanic. A man I mentored. A man who learned, struggled, failed, and got back up again. A man who remembers where he came from, who treats people with kindness, not obligation, who respected my wife more than my own grandson ever has. Gary leaned back in his chair. Do you want to write a letter to accompany the will for your family? Yes, I said. 2 letters, actually. One for Julio and one for Clara and Jeremy. You'll find drafts in the folder. He opened the flap and pulled out 2 folded sheets. He skimmed the one addressed to Julio first and smiled faintly. Then he looked at the one for Clara and Jeremy. His expression shifted. You sure you want to be this direct? I nodded. I've been silent for too long. Let them hear me now, even if I'm gone. He nodded. It's your right. Your story. We spent the next hour going through everything, line by line. Property deeds, bank information, beneficiary updates, contingencies in case Julio declined. He wouldn't. And funeral preferences. I opted for something simple. No big show. Cremation. Ashes scattered at the lake Maria used to love. When we were done, Gary sealed everything into a thick envelope and handed me a copy. You've just rewritten your entire legacy, he said. Feels good, I replied. I stood, a little lighter somehow, and reached for my coat. One more thing, I said. I'd like to set aside $10,000 from my savings as a grant fund. For? A scholarship, I said. In Maria's name. For trade school students, mechanics. Anyone who works with their hands and dreams with their heart. He smiled again, wider this time. Frank, that's beautiful. No, I said, it's justice. That night, back home, I parked the Impala in the garage and just sat with her for a while. I ran a cloth over her dashboard, cleared a smudge off the rearview mirror. She'd been with me through more than anyone else. She deserved better than a boy who saw her as a joke. I pulled out a notebook and wrote one last thing. A note to Julio. I'd hand it to him myself, soon enough. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about making sure that when I was gone, the story of who I was, of what I loved, didn't vanish with me. This wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was restoration. The day of the reading was quiet, but heavy. It took place 3 weeks after the funeral, in the very same office where I had rewritten everything. Clara had chosen a tasteful black dress and sunglasses, even though the weather was overcast and the office blinds were drawn. Jeremy showed up late, of course, wearing a wrinkled hoodie and chewing gum like it was a badge of defiance. He leaned back in the waiting room chair like the world owed him something, tapping his sneaker against the tile floor in an impatient rhythm. They expected something simple, routine, a brief moment of paperwork, followed by a modest sum they could mentally spend before even touching it. Clara had already hinted about remodeling the kitchen. Jeremy had already told friends he might upgrade his laptop. They didn't cry much at the funeral. A few quiet sniffles, a few hugs, but nothing more. The kind of grief you perform when you're not really sure what you've lost. The truth was, I'd already said goodbye. Not just to life, but to them. They didn't know I'd been planning this for years, that I had quietly pulled the strings, bit my tongue through holidays, birthday dinners, and lukewarm Father's Day cards. I had watched them turn into strangers, and now they would learn who I really was. Not the version they tolerated, but the man they had underestimated. Gary Stein sat behind his desk and cleared his throat. "Thank you both for coming," he began. "Frank and I had several conversations before he passed. He made very deliberate decisions regarding his estate, and he left instructions that the will be read aloud in person." Clara folded her hands primly in her lap. "Of course, that's fine." Jeremy rolled his eyes. "Can we just skip to the numbers?" Gary paused, then opened the envelope and began to read. "To my daughter Clara, you were raised in love, in a house built with the kind of labor most people avoid. You were never denied a meal, a coat, or a place to sleep. You had every opportunity your mother and I could provide, and more. But somewhere along the way, comfort turned into expectation. You stopped listening, you stopped seeing, and eventually, you taught your son to do the same. I love you. I always have. But I can no longer pretend that love means blindness." Clara's posture stiffened. Her lips tightened. Gary continued. "To my grandson, Jeremy, you laughed at the things that mattered to me. You mocked what you did not understand. You disrespected a man who had done nothing but show up. I hope one day you learn that inheritance is not a birthright. It is earned through character, kindness, and humility. As such, you will receive nothing." There was silence, just the soft ticking of Gary's wall clock. Jeremy blinked. "What the hell?" Clara reached for the arms of her chair, gripping them like she might break the wood. "Wait a minute," she said. "What do you mean? Nothing." "I mean," Gary said calmly, "the entirety of Frank's estate, including his savings, his home, his life insurance, his garage lease, and the vehicle he treasured, have been left to Mr. Julio Martinez." Jeremy laughed, but it was hollow. "That guy? The mechanic?" Clara leaned forward, voice rising. "This must be a mistake. My father would never do that." Gary folded the document. "Your father did exactly that. In fact, he left me detailed instructions. He even set aside money for a scholarship fund, in your mother's name, for young trade workers." "But we're his family," Clara hissed. "Legacy," Gary replied, "is not about genetics. It's about values." Jeremy stood up, knocking over his chair. He was senile. He must have been. We could contest this, right? This is insane. "You're welcome to try," Gary said. "But I assure you, the will is ironclad. Your father was of sound mind. He simply decided to give his life's work to someone who understood what it was worth." Clara didn't say anything for a long time. She just stared at the floor, her hands slowly unclenching. When they left the office, Jeremy was swearing under his breath. Clara was quiet, her heels clicking angrily on the hallway tile. And me? Well, I wasn't there in body, but I was there in every word, every sentence, every silence. Later that week, Julio stood in my garage, holding the letter I'd written him. Tears welled in his eyes as he read my final words. "You treated my life's work with reverence. You respected my wife's memory. You saw value in what others dismissed. This isn't a gift. It's a passing of the torch. Take care of her. The car, the garage, the name. I believe in you. I always have." He pressed his hand to the hood of the Impala, still and reverent, and whispered, "Thank you." Clara didn't speak to anyone for days after the will reading. Not to Jeremy, not to her husband, not even to her best friend, who kept texting to ask if she was okay. She spent most of her time in the living room, nursing cold tea and rereading the letter Frank had left behind. The words were not cruel. No, that would have been easier. They were measured, precise, honest. And somehow, that hurt more. There was a line that kept circling her mind like a bird looking for somewhere to land. "I can no longer pretend that love means blindness." She had read it again and again. Every time it hit her harder, because deep down, beneath all the defenses and justifications and busyness of her middle-aged life, she knew he was right. She had stopped listening. Not all at once, not maliciously, but slowly, in the way children sometimes grow up and assume their parents are stuck, unchanging, irrelevant. She told herself he was old-fashioned, too sentimental, even out of touch. And because he never raised his voice, she assumed he was fine. Because he never asked for more, she assumed he didn't need it. And Jeremy, well, she had let him become who he was. She'd brushed off his sarcasm, laughed when he joked about boomers, and rolled her eyes when Frank tried to share stories. She called it teenage behavior, but it wasn't. It was something darker, entitlement. She'd planted the seed and watched it grow. Now, the harvest was bitter. Jeremy, on the other hand, didn't go quiet. He raged. He slammed doors, cursed at the walls, screamed that it wasn't fair, that it was just a stupid car, and who even leaves a fortune to a mechanic? He said things no grandson should say. And when Clara finally confronted him, really confronted him, she saw something terrifying. He wasn't sorry, not even a little. He believed he deserved everything, and he couldn't comprehend a world where he got nothing. "You humiliated him," she said one night, standing in the doorway to his room. "You humiliated my father." Jeremy scoffed, tossing his phone aside. "All this over that stupid car? You're seriously taking his side?" "He was your grandfather," she snapped, her voice cracking. He turned to her, arms crossed. "Yeah? Then maybe he should have acted like one." That was the first time Clara slapped her son. It wasn't hard, it wasn't dramatic. Just a sharp sting of palm against cheek, followed by a stunned silence that hung in the air like smoke. She didn't apologize. She just turned around and left the room. Meanwhile, across town, Julio stood alone in the garage, holding the keys to a legacy he'd never expected. He had spent the first few days in a kind of daze. The Impala sat in Bay 1, freshly washed and waxed, her leather seat still smelling faintly of the oil Frank used to rub into the dash. The title had been transferred, the papers signed, the bank account had cleared. He was now, officially, the sole owner of Frank Harding's estate. The house, the savings, the shop, and the car. That had meant more to Frank than anything else left in this world. But more than the money. It was the gesture that overwhelmed him, the trust, the quiet passing of the torch. Frank hadn't just given him things, he had given him meaning. Julio opened the letter again, rereading the part that always made his throat tighten. You are the son I would have chosen, not because of blood, but because of honor. You treated me with dignity when I had nothing left to prove. That is a rare kind of love. He set the letter down and walked to the wall where he had already begun hanging new photos. Old snapshots of Frank in the garage, of Maria holding tray of cookies, of the Impala half restored in the background of some forgotten summer day. He was building a tribute. Not a shrine, but a story. One customers could walk past on their way to the waiting room. One he could point to when young apprentices asked why he did things a certain way. Because Frank's way had worked. Because Frank had never needed applause to do the right thing. Outside, the rain that had lingered for a week finally broke. The sun cracked through the clouds, casting a beam of gold across the garage floor. Julio turned on the radio, an old blues station Frank used to like, and began polishing the Impala's fenders. One hand steady, one heart full. Weeks passed, then months. Clara eventually returned to the lawyer's office. Not to contest the will, she knew better now, but to request a copy of the scholarship paperwork. She donated to it quietly, anonymously, $1,000 from her savings. It was the least she could do. Jeremy never visited the garage again. He grew distant, sulky, confused by a world that no longer bent for him. College came and went. Opportunities slipped through his fingers. He never said his grandfather's name again. And as for Julio, he flourished. The garage gained reputation. Business grew. He hired 2 more apprentices, one of whom had been rejected from a dozen programs before Julio gave him a shot. Don't worry, Julio said with a smile. Someone gave me one once too. The Impala remained in Bay 1. Not for repairs, she didn't need them, but because she belonged there. As a symbol, as a reminder, as a piece of a man whose love was quiet, but firm as steel. And every Sunday, just as Frank had done, Julio would wipe her down, start the engine, and let her purr. Not for a trip, but for the sound, that deep, rich growl of legacy. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Julio stood by the hood, hand resting on the warm metal. He looked out at the street, thinking about Frank, about everything he'd given, about how you didn't need to raise a child to father someone, about how sometimes the most meaningful family is the one you earn, not the one you're born into. He whispered softly, I won't let you down. And he didn't.